Hey, Gabe.
Hey, what's up, Tim?
In the Alfred Hitchcock movie that we watched for today's podcast, Notorious, the villains tried to hide uranium in a nice bottle of wine. You know, it seems like if they wanted to keep it hidden, it would have been better to use a bottle of absinthe. At least then no one would bat an eye when it was glowing green.
Tim, I think you're being super critical.
Welcome to another episode of the Supercritical Podcast, where we delve into the fun and oftentimes nonsensical way pop culture portrays nuclear weapons. My name is Tim Westmyer, someone who studies nuclear weapons and works on nuclear non-proliferation for a living. And I'm happy to be joined again on the podcast over Zoom with my usual co-host, Gabe. Gabe, welcome back to the show.
Hey, Tim, and thanks for having me back, despite the fact that I have absolutely zero qualifications to be talking about nuclear weapons or movies for that matter, or most things anyway, but it's fun to be here.
Well, you're a dear friend. You have a keen eye for interesting things to point out in movies, and you've been wanting to cover an oldie, a spy movie, a noir, something along these lines. It's your jam, right?
Yeah, I mean, I've dabbled in the genre. I've seen a few kind of older movies, film noir. I had this quest several years ago to make it through the AFI like top 100 list. And I think I made it like 3 movies in and then stopped. But I really like these like older classic Hollywood type things. And I'd never seen an Alfred Hitchcock movie before. So thank you for, you never forget your first time. Thank you, Tim.
Well, the one that we're going to talk about today is literally one of the very first examples of nuclear weapons as a plot device, really in any film. And this is the 1946 movie called Notorious. If you Google it, it's not the one about Biggie, the rapper. This is the 1946 Notorious, directed by Alfred Hitchcock. He loved staying very current. He liked seeing what the latest trends were in movies, whether it was a spy movie or a suspense or a thriller. And when he read the news reports, and he had a friend that we'll talk about a little bit later, who was talking about the mysterious potential of uranium, part of potentially like a bomb project in the 1940s. Well, before the Manhattan Project itself was actually revealed to the public, he knew exactly what he wanted the next MacGuffin plot device to be in his movies. So you mentioned you hadn't seen any Hitchcock movies before, but what was your impression of what Hitchcock brings to the cinema?
Yeah, I mean, we'll talk more toward the end, but I really liked it. I'm a kind of a sucker for a lot of the old classics. I mean, I'm very interested in them. I can't say I've seen a lot of them, but this one really did it. Just something about the pacing, and yeah, I'm excited to hear more about kind of the nuclear device, because it definitely it added something into this movie. It felt like I was going to be watching this old movie, and it felt a little bit ahead of its time with this plot device. There, didn't make it feel quite so old.
And it doesn't have the claim as the first movie with nuclear stuff in the plot. That one probably is most likely going to go to a 1945 movie that was released a year before called First Yank in Tokyo. I don't recommend anyone watch it. It's incredibly racist, as you would imagine from a movie about the World War II in 1945. Its central point is the war in the Pacific. But they literally filmed this movie, and then when the atomic bomb was dropped on Hiroshima and Nagasaki, which an anniversary that's being acknowledged this month because it took place in August in 1945, they took some footage that was released about the atomic testing and used it for the final scene of the movie. So it's kind of like a quick add-on thing. So that gets the first claim for kind of an imagery of nuclear weapons. But this movie does have some good stuff in it. It's got a stellar cast. Cary Grant, Ingrid Bergman, and Claude Rains. And Claude Rains, who plays the villain of this movie, was nominated for an Oscar for Best Supporting Actor. Really great stuff. Have you ever seen anything else with Cary Grant or Ingrid Bergman? Cary Grant's also in a couple Hitchcock stuff, like North by Northwest. Yeah. Have you seen anything else from them?
The one that definitely comes to mind is Ingrid Bergman, Casablanca, which is the movie I've seen a number of times and really enjoyed.
Nice. Well, people like this movie. It made about $4.8 million in its first box office kind of domestic run, which is pretty big in 1946. And it's one of the highest earning movies of that year. It gets a 98% fresh rating on critics, so not many people don't like it, including Roger Ebert. who praised the film, said it was one of his top 10 favorite movies of all time. He added it to his great movies list and called it the, quote, most elegant expression of the master's visual style. So let's get into it and talk about why we're even covering it in the first place, because it is this movie from 1946, spy thriller, but it's got some fun nuke stuff in it. So, as usual, spoiler warning. The movie is available on YouTube for free. Don't tell anybody. But I think it's old enough that no one's going to cause any sort of a stink if you do watch it. But it's available on YouTube and other places. Or, if you find me somewhere, I'll loan you the Blu-ray disc.
That's only if I give it back to you, though, Tim.
Oh, yeah, it might have to be an early birthday gift or something.
What's your angle?
Got a job for you.
There's only one job that you coppers would want me for.
You remember a man named Sebastian?
One of my father's friends, yes.
He's part of the combine that built up the German war machine and hopes to keep on going. We have to contact him.
She's a perfect type for the job. Sebastian knows her. He was once in love with her. She's good at making friends with gentlemen.
I don't think any of us have any illusions about her character, have we, Devlin?
This is a very strange love affair.
Find out what's going on inside his house, what the group around him is up to, and report to us.
Oh, darling, what you didn't tell them, tell me. That you believe I'm nice and that I love you. I'll never change back.
She's had me worried for some time. A woman of that sort.
I was watching you and your friend, Mr. Devlin.
Mr. Devlin doesn't mean a thing to me.
I'd like to be convinced.
Someone is coming.
I'm going to kiss you.
No, he'll only think we...
What
no.
I want him to think. Because it's a tough job we're on. You've never been trained for that kind of work.
I've got to get you out of here.
So we open in Miami, Florida, on April 24th, 1946 at 3:20 p.m. And we know this to the exact minute because the movie tells us. But what happens, Gabe? It's got a little bit. We're at a courthouse, and we get a little bit of a hubbub.
Yeah, there's this kind of big throng of photographers and journalists who are waiting on this verdict. There's the trial of a man named John Huberman, who is charged with treason against the United States, and the verdict is guilty, 20 years in prison. We don't really ever kind of hear then exactly what he did, but it kind of gets revealed later on through his daughter. It cuts to a scene where they want to get a statement from her whether the trial was fair and if he was actually a Nazi spy. There is some level of intrigue, and there's a pair of people who promise to follow her and make sure that she doesn't leave town.
Yeah, it definitely seems so. It's a year after World War II is over. People are doing trials. Who was in charge and who was knowing what was happening in the Nazi Party and in Germany and in other parts of the Axis. But here in the United States, yeah, exactly, trying to do some cases and figure out who might be operating from the Nazis' perspective, in the States. And it seems like this person was caught up in this. And Alicia is the daughter, Alicia Huberman. She's the one that's played by Ingrid Bergman. She is not happy about the fact that she gets asked all these questions about the dad. But you know what she does to deal with all of the press and the bad news and all of this? She throws a party with all of her friends. They stay up all night drinking at their house. Even one of the people that's like a friend of hers is like, hey, we're going to take this boat to Cuba tomorrow morning. Do you want to come with us? You hang out in Havana for a couple of days and you'll forget all about this thing. And I think she would have done that except for the introduction of Cary Grant's character, T.R. Devlin, who kind of comes out of nowhere, and they hang out for a little bit, right? And she proposes that they go outside for a picnic. And a great line in this movie, Devlin, when they're walking out, says,
Don't you need a coat?
You'll do.
Yeah, it's like classic, like old movie. You can't really pull that off these days, but no, I like the way they set it up too. He's like very mysterious. I don't think you kind of see the back of his head for a while, and then finally he gets revealed. So there's clearly something about this dude. It also, like, you get the feel from this party that this woman, like, this is not her first time hosting a party with a lot of gentleman company. If you know what I mean. There is some cringeworthy stuff here. It's an older movie. So yeah, it kind of fits that paradigm of somewhat loose woman who's like hanging out with all these guys and a lot of innuendo and things like that. But yeah, you get the sense that she enjoys her drink and she enjoys a good time out.
Speaking of, instead of just going on a picnic, say, outside or somewhere within walking distance, because again, she's been drinking pretty heavily, she goes on a drunken joyride, basically a drunk driving joyride.
Want to go for a ride?
Very much.
I'm going to drive. That's understood.
With her friend Devlin. And Devlin is nervous but doesn't do anything. He just kind of maybe has his hand on the wheel, but that doesn't do you all that much when you're going 60, 70 miles on a spinny road. She gets pulled over by the police. Fortunately, Devlin is able to just kind of flash his ID badge and everything. The police just goes away. He says, "I'm sorry, I didn't know who you were." And it turns out, she gets really upset at this because she hates cops. She thinks he's a cop. She doesn't realize he's a federal agent. She fights. She says, "Get out of the car." He doesn't get out of the car because he knows that she's probably just going to drive away angry and drunk. He can't be angry and drunk. I imagine that's the cocktail that gets you in trouble. But he karate chops her into unconsciousness. It really isn't clear what happened,
Yeah.
but at least she's not driving drunk anymore.
We're like, it's like 5 minutes into the movie and we're in Cringe City with this like stereotypical misogynistic portrayal, the drunk driving, and then the dude like basically attacking her in the car. So
But
yeah, we're definitely in the we're definitely not in the 2021.
no, but again, the movie, all of these scenes are very well portrayed in terms of like the cinematography, and the acting is really great. So again, the first time I watched it, I was like, this is kind of odd. But the second time I watched it, I'm like, it's odd, but it's kind of beautiful in a way, except for the karate chopping into unconsciousness. That doesn't look good in any light. But as Alicia wakes up in her bed, she wakes up to next to a glass of like some awful tasting hangover cure that Devlin makes. What do you think was in that thing? Because it really seems to get her sobered up pretty quickly.
I don't know. It's probably like I always see these hangover cures, especially like if I'm in Europe or something, and you go into small convenience stores and they have these like, they look like they've been made on the cheap and they're like hangover cure and they have like weird ingredients and they're like, if you drink this, you're probably gonna feel like you're just gonna throw up right away. So maybe it was like one of those, a forerunner of one of those.
Well, it works. It works well enough so that Devlin can talk to her about a job that she's got for her. Which is to go down to Brazil and infiltrate a group of some ex-Nazis that are now living freely in Brazil. They're working for some mysterious company called IG Farben Industries. They think that she's a good candidate to go down there and kind of infiltrate this group because someone who used to pay her father, someone that used to love her, is working for them. And she thinks, I don't know if I really want to do this. He first tries to convince her about, tries to appeal to her patriotism. She says, no, this is not at work. That's not going to work on me. But then, as you mentioned earlier, they clearly have been following her for a little while. They play a wiretap conversation between her and her father about how she really didn't like his plans to work with the Nazis and that she actually loved the United States. So this allows her to at least make a decision. Do I go on this boat cruise to Havana for a couple of days, or do I go help Devlin? And ultimately she decides to get on the plane with him, to go down to Brazil, maybe as penance for her father's deeds. Maybe she actually wants to succeed at this, or maybe she just likes Devlin and wants this secret hangover cure.
I thought this was actually quite interesting because I didn't realize that the whole like Nazis going to South America was a thing that was known about so soon after the war. Like I thought that was something that kind of emerged like decades later. So I didn't realize that. So that was kind of interesting that it was like right after that they knew that there were these kind of like Nazi operators like heading down there.
They know that they're down there. They don't know what they're up to. They know they're up to something weird. And that's why, why go after just some random people? They know there's some sort of effort that there's going to do that would give whatever military arm is left of the Nazi party, they would allow them to rearm and have a significant advantage. So there must be something pretty significant here. So they're on this plane, and Devlin tells Alicia kind of, I guess he should tell her at some point. He tells her right as soon as the plane about to take off that his boss, this guy named Paul Prescott, told him that Alicia's father has killed himself earlier that day while in prison with a poison capsule. And this really seems to shake up Alicia. she had mixed feelings about him, but obviously she still loved her father, deep down. But she knows she has a job to do in Rio, so this seems to inspire her to not only kind of work hard, but also to get sober, right? She says that she was sober for 8 days. They're at a cafe in Rio, and are enjoying their time before they get their mission plans. And she seems like she says she really wants to change, and I guess the movie's implying that, what she means by that is, I guess, not drinking and not partying. But Devlin doesn't seem to believe her all that much, right?
Yeah, no, he says that he's just not buying it.
I'm practically on the wagon. That's quite a change.
It's a phase.
You don't think a woman can change?
Sure. And change is fun. For a while.
For a while.
You've been sober for 8 days. And as far as I know, you've made no new conquests.
Well, that's something.
8 days.
I'm very happy there. Why won't you let me be happy?
Nobody's stopping you.
It's so funny, like all the circumspect stuff in this movie. Like they never actually, they're always kind of like dancing around her like lifestyle and everything. And so it's kind of interesting to see the strong emotions about it when they're talking in such a circumspect way, because there's just things you couldn't say like back then in the movie, right?
Mm-hmm.
You couldn't portray a woman as like a drunk, just like falling over. It's just a very gentle, but then the reactions are kind of implied. So it's kind of weird, like as a modern viewer seeing these movies, and you're used to this stuff being like much more like real now, and it really wasn't back then.
Well, another movie that we covered on the podcast fairly recently called On the Beach, which stars Gregory Peck and Ava Gardner. And even in that movie, it's kind of like a stern, tall drink of water man who's going to work for the government is coming into town, and he meets with a woman who the movie portrays as someone that is a bit of a heavy drinker, partier, someone who likes to date, that kind of situation. Like that's the movie's morals that they put onto it. So I would say it's interesting to do this as some sort of weird nuke movie thing, but I imagine it's just in a lot of movies in the 40s and 50s. But this movie, it gets even kind of really rough. Like, Devlin's kind of mean to her. At one point he says, yeah, I know women, they can change for a time when it's fun, and then eventually they kind of fall back. But no matter all these insults, no matter this back and forth sniping at each other, the very next scene is they drive up to a mountain, and then they kiss on top of a mountain, and then they turns out they're in love, and everything's fine, and they're very happily together, and everything's perfectly fine. I guess they had fallen in love, despite all of the bickering back and forth.
Surprise, surprise! Cary Grant and Ingrid Bergman, yeah. So
there's a show that I'm watching a lot on YouTube right now. I told you about it, called it's a Screen Rant's YouTube skit show. Called, Pitch Meeting.
Yeah.
They always say, like, and these two people start, they get together, and the other person goes, why? Why do they get together? And the guy goes back and goes, he was pitching the movie to this executive producer, goes, because they're the two main characters.
Exactly.
Because they're both attractive. That's why they're together. Oh, got it. Okay, please proceed.
Yeah, that makes total sense. Yeah.
Anyways, it does work. They make a lovely couple, at least until Prescott, Devlin's boss, gives him the job details, which is that Alicia is going to infiltrate this local group run by this guy who used to, be in love with her, called Alexander Sebastian. He works for this business group, the IG Farben group. He wants her to get in his good graces, learn more about what the Nazis are up to down there, collect names, figure out what's going on, and then hopefully they can dismantle whatever they're trying to do to get the German war machine, get it back up and going. They want to stop that from happening. Devlin finds out about this job, and he's not too happy about it, right?
Yeah, no, he's clearly disturbed that he's in love with her, and she's going to get sent in to basically fake fall in love with this guy, Alexander. So I guess the whole idea is that, he knows her dad knew her dad through, I guess there's like a Nazi chat room or something.
I think they used to know each other when they were in DC together.
Okay, all right. So that's why she's kind of being used as the bait. Devlin tries to overrule the bosses, and he doesn't tell the bosses that he's in love with her, but he puts up a pretty strong protest. Prescott kind of suspects it, but he's overruled, and the plan's going forward. And as a result, then there's like a total change in their dynamic. They were all like, lovey-dovey, and all of a sudden he's like back to being like the cold, like, G-man, Hollywood G-man archetype.
you're right. Devlin's like really cold to her when they go back to their like hotel apartment area. She hates cooking dinner, but she makes him like a chicken. And they're supposed to sit outside. He was supposed to buy a bottle of wine that he left at Prescott's office. And Alicia doesn't want the plan. She doesn't love the plan. She asked Devlin if you backed her up, and said that it wasn't her style anymore. But he's just so mean. He's like really mean to her.
Skip it. We have other things to talk about. We've got a job. You remember a man named Sebastian?
Alex Sebastian. One of my father's friends, yes.
He had quite a crush on you.
I wasn't very responsive.
Well, he's here, the head of a large German business concern. He's part of the combine that built up the German war machine and hopes to keep on going.
Something big?
It has all the earmarks of being something big. We have to contact him. Find out what's going on inside this house, what the group around him is up to, and report to us.
Did you say anything? Maybe I wasn't the girl for such shenanigans.
I figured that was up to you.
Not a word for that little lovesick lady you left an hour ago.
I told you that's the assignment.
Do you want me to take the job?
You're answering for yourself.
I am asking you, not a peep. Oh, darling, what you didn't tell them, tell me. That you believe I'm nice and that I love you and I'll never change back.
I'm waiting for your answer.
What a little pal you are. Never believing me, Not a word of faith, just down the drain with Alicia. That's where she belongs.
But she still agrees to go and start the plan in the morning, and their chicken gets cold, just like their relationship.
The interesting thing, so with the bottle of wine that he leaves at Prescott's office or whatever, there's a lot of appearances of bottles of wine in this movie. We'll get into more later. And like alcohol in general, it plays this big role in this movie. But even like wine bottles, that was like the first time we really see it. And it's just like, I don't know if this is, I haven't seen any Hitchcock, so I don't know if this is part of a thing, but there was just like this focus on this one object, and it kind of starts in that scene.
After this little bit of a bump in the relationship, they decide to start this connection, try to reforge this connection between Alicia and Sebastian, and they figure out that he's riding horses the next day, so Devlin and Alicia try to get his attention. He doesn't notice her, doesn't remember her. So what does Devlin do? He like kicks her horse, which causes the horse to like run off, and then Sebastian, because he's a nice guy apparently, goes to go to save her, and it works. Fortunately, Alicia is not killed by a runaway horse, but at least it causes him to save her, and then Sebastian takes her out to dinner, and then they bond over their dislike of American police and American secret agents. But the thing is that Sebastian knows of Devlin because he saw her with him. So she just says that he's a guy she met on the plane, and he's like obsessed with her. And then he's like, okay, all right, well, I have a little bit of competition now. It's kind of a interesting little love triangle going on there.
The interesting part of that too is, I mean, like Cary Grant is like, very attractive, like leading man. He's probably at like peak attractiveness in his life in this movie. And I forget the name of the guy who plays
Claude Rains.
Yeah, Claude Rains. Like he's a little bit past his prime here. I mean, he's like an older dude. Like it's just kind of weird. He must be like in his 50s or something in this movie, late 50s maybe, and it just kind of sets up this weird. Maybe that's part of the idea that he's getting this ego bump from this younger woman like chasing him around instead of this young guy. I just thought I don't know, that just kind of looked kind of strange to me in this.
Well, after they're done with their horseplay, he invites her over to a dinner party over at his house. And, again, sorry, guys, at this point, you're listening to this podcast. We're about 25 minutes in, and you're wondering, when are we getting to the nuke stuff? Well, here we are. So they're at the party, and Alicia, she meets all of these people that she knows are like secret Nazis down there as part of this Farben group. And this group includes this very mysterious person. He's a scientist. His name is Dr. Anderson. And it turns out he's a Nazi scientist doing experiments at the house under a false name. One of the guests at the dinner party has a little bit of a thing where he sees like a bottle of wine that's just kind of sitting out. No one's drinking it or anything. It's capped. He points at it and like kind of like panics and makes this like a little bit of a scene. And everyone says, calm down. His name is Emil. He points at the bottle and everything, and he freaks out, and they get him aside, and they apologize for everything. And then when the party's over, it turns out like they've all agreed, like these members of the secret cadre of ex-Nazis are gonna like kill Emil for this outburst because they don't suffer no fool as part of their secret plans.
I'm afraid, gentlemen, that something must be done about Emil. I don't know. It was an understandable slip. Man was tired.
No, it's a very dangerous slip.
There'll be more, if you permit him. That's bad. It's very bad. I think, gentlemen, you can leave it to me to find some way. When you drive up to Petropolis, the road winds quite a bit. It is very high. There are some very awkward turns.
Of course, they did leave the bottle, like, sitting there. But Alicia notices it. She notices what's happening.
Even this was a little bit difficult to follow exactly what was going on here. And, like, why did this outburst bother them so much? I think it's clear at the end that they're going to kill him. This reminded me, you remember when we were doing Sum of All Fears? This reminded me, like, there was that group of Nazis, and, like, one of them is once out of the plan, and he gets killed on the way out. I was like, look at this. Like, they stole it from Notorious.
He gets killed by the guy, the real big dude there.
Yeah.
Her Heft, I think his name is. Yeah. No, it's very, very similar here. They say they're going to kill him and make it look like a car accident. They clearly mean business, but they are also... Something about this bottle of wine freaked them out, and they didn't want to draw any attention to it. But Devlin and Alicia, they meet up again. She reports about the bottle and how, weird this is, and Devlin's thinking this could be something here. But he's also super jealous, right? Even though the plan is that she gets close to him, close to Sebastian, he's really upset about this. So upset. So they meet up at a horse race, and Sebastian sees Devlin and her together. And he comes up to her and basically says, like, look, you're going to have to prove to me that this Devlin guy means nothing to you. How are you going to do that? I'm going to propose to you.
Yeah.
She goes then reports back to Prescott and to Devlin and says, like, what should I do about this? And Devlin's not happy about it. Neither is Alicia. Prescott tells her to accept the offer. They're going to have a little kind of private wedding the following week. And she gets married. She gets married, she moves into the guy's house, and she's looking for something about the bottle, right? She's trying to figure out where the wine cellar is kept. And it took me a couple of the second viewing of the movie to understand what was happening here. But because at first she just starts complaining that the closets in the house, like she's like being followed by the butler, and says that the closets are too small, and she's looking for a big closet.
Oh, this isn't very large. I'll need more room.
And she just starts going through all the whole house, like opening the closets, because she wants to see... Where is the wine cellar? Where are the bottles kept? Who has keys to everything? And then she finds out that, that Dr. Anderson is there. She overhears him saying that the work is complete.
Oh, you want a report? A written report. Well, my friends, my work is done. You've been successful. Yes.
And that he can move on to something else now. She eventually finds out that there's a wine cellar, but the only person that has a key to the wine cellar is Sebastian, and he keeps the key on him. She now knows that she needs to get that key. That's where the mysterious wine cellar is. How does she get the key? Because Devlin has an idea of how she can get the time to get the key and then to distract Sebastian.
Yeah, so Devlin convinces her to convince Sebastian to throw this big party so that they can get the key. There's this like elaborate scene where I forget exactly what happens in it, but she is kind of like taking the key off of his keychain like while he's there and has to like do this elaborate dance and like drop it on the floor as he comes in, and she's able to get the key at the end, and they go down into the wine cellar where they're gonna like poke around together.
It's a big time crunch because they know they have to get down to the wine cellar and be done with it by the time that the party runs out of champagne. So it's kind of a bit of a ticking clock there.
Well, and this was another use of the wine bottle. Like, obviously there's the wine bottles in the wine cellar, but there was this like very suspenseful focus on, the waiters area where they have the bottles of champagne and they're like pouring champagne and, when are they going to run out and this kind of thing. They do get down the cellar, and Devlin accidentally knocks over one of the bottles, and it does not contain wine, but contains some sort of strange sand-looking material, metal ore material.
Yeah, I know you have a background in geology. Given that it was a black and white movie from 1946, what would you have, just using your analysis there, maybe a magnifying glass or an enhanced screen situation, what did it look like to you?
I don't know. It looked like just like gravel or something. They must have used something. This was like before if this were modern Hollywood, it'd be like glowing and there'd be like, weird. There'd be some like special effect going on, but this is low budget. You're there to see Cary Grant. You're not there to see the war.
Well, it turns out it is uranium ore.
I think you can be very proud of yourself, Mrs. Sebastian. That sand that Devlin brought in shows uranium ore. So now we know what we're driving at. And your job from now on will be to try to help us find out where that sand comes from. The location of the uranium deposit is of vast importance, and we're putting quite a few people on it. But I think you'll be a great help.
All right.
But we want to find out, not only, where did this ore come from? They want to know, like, where is this uranium deposit? Apparently somewhere in Brazil. They want to know how they're getting it and what they're up to. It's hard to tell in the movie, and we'll get to this at the very end, whether this is like enriched uranium ore, meaning if you go to to a mine and you break a rock and you get some uranium, right? The amount of actual elements of that uranium that you could use in an atomic bomb or in a nuclear power plant, it's way less than like 0.5%. It's very rare when you think about the total types of elements of uranium. You have to take that uranium, you mine it, you mill it down into a powder, or then you turn it into a gas, or you do different things to then take all the stuff you don't want away and just leave the heavier element that you do want. You could do a couple different ways you go about and do that. Uranium enrichment facilities, you can do with electricity, you can use lasers if you want to. There's all kinds of stuff you can do. But it just seems like this is just like uranium ore, like filings of uranium ore or something. It's hard to tell if it's like enriched or not enriched, but either way, it's safe to touch. It's perfectly fine to grab and touch and everything. We find out that it's uranium ore. They kind of somewhat put a bottle back together, right? They like take some of the ore.
It was also very strange. He like finds another random bottle somewhere that he thought matched the wine, and they put the ore back in.
Yeah, not the same year.
Right, but he thought it was like a good enough match and that nobody would notice. And well, it turns out they didn't do a good enough job, but we'll get to that later. But in the meantime, like time's up. Sebastian comes down to the cellar and sees them there, and they cover up their spying by they start kissing each other and making it seem like they had ducked away. And this, allows Devlin to kind of leave. They have a very gentlemanly exchange where Sebastian is like politely invites him to leave the party for making out with his wife.
For what it's worth, as an apology, your wife is telling the truth. I knew her before you, loved her before you, but I wasn't as lucky as you. Sorry, Alicia.
Please go.
Good night.
Yeah, it's very much like she says, no, it's not what you think. He kissed me, and I told him I didn't want it. And he goes, yes, I do apologize. I did come here, and I did drink too much, but I now realize that she doesn't love me. I will leave. Take my good day, sir. And it's like, exactly. No. You assaulted this poor woman. Call the police.
Again, this is not 2021 in this movie, so they get away with this.
But Sebastian is clearly still a little suspicious. He looks at his key ring, and the key is missing.
They messed up. They forgot to put the key back. But then she puts it back in the middle of the night. And in the morning, he notices that it's back on the chain. So they're going to have a time that's not off the chain because he now he knows that she's like betrayed him. And so he then digs even further, goes back down to the wine cellar, and notices that the date on the bottle that Devlin tried to fix is actually wrong. It doesn't match the other one. So, he sees that kind of the cap is put on improperly. He knows like something's not good. So he goes to his mother, which is also weird because like she must be like really old because he's already pretty old, but she's kind of like spry and like the mastermind. She shows up earlier in the movie as kind of suspicious about Alicia and this whole thing. Mother knows best, and in this case, that they need to murder his wife with a slow illness and death.
Exactly. They poison her slowly through like tea and food, and she's like real weak. There's a pretty good scene in this movie where she is, they're gonna probably give her the last bit of poison that will like knock her, into the afterlife. She gets interrupted by Dr. Anderson, who comes by and says, "Hey, I'm gonna leave now. I'm gonna go hang out somewhere else here and and finish my work or whatever. And he goes to like drink her tea, and they all go, no, 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 no.
Yeah, and then she knows. Do you think they were using the same uranium as the poison? Like they just like, or was it too valuable? They needed it, but it's like, you know.
Well, there are a lot of very sad examples of the Russians poisoning people in their tea with polonium, which is not uranium, but it's because uranium, look, plutonium is real bad if you inhale it or get it into your body. It's not that bad if you hold it because it's an alpha emitter, alpha particles, which you can block by your skin. Uranium is very similar. Uranium filings are not good things to consume because they're like toxic, but they're not enough radioactivity off of just pure uranium that would really, do you in. It's not good stuff at all, to be fair. But like polonium is really bad. Like polonium is very radioactive, and several people in the Russians have gotten quite good at assassinating people, and sometimes in their tea.
There's like I gotta say, like when it comes to like sinister methods of murder, like poisoning is like well at the top, because like anybody can shoot somebody or stab somebody. But like if you're getting into poisoning, that's like a whole nother level of like planning and sinister. For me, that worked very well with this mother character. It's not like I'm making her like super evil in this movie.
Yeah, and it's rough because in this scene that I really thought was well done, you see a lot of shots of like her when she realizes what's happening. She wants to get away. She wants to call the police. She wants to get out, but the poison from earlier is starting to take effect, and there's lots of shots from like her perspective, and she sees the mother and Sebastian, but it's like hazy silhouettes, and they almost look like demonic figures. Very, very good stuff here, and she gets bedridden, right? She's sick there. No one's coming to see her. They say they're going to bring a doctor, but they don't actually bring a doctor. I think they're just basically going to wait it out until she passes away. And Devlin himself too, right? He's kind of upset by the whole thing. He doesn't know what's happening to her. He just knows that she kind of like disappeared, and maybe wonders whether or not she's ignoring him. He's about to be transferred to Spain, kind of away from the mission. So
we thought that they were going to be separated, that they were done, and she was like, she thinks she's all on her own, that Devlin's gone. But guess what? He decides that he's going to come back and try to rescue her and find out what's going on.
He found out that she was in the end his cup of tea.
I knew we'd have a pun. I thought we were going to have a pun about horsing around earlier, but you missed that one.
I think I did say it, but you didn't realize it because I just say so many of them.
I just tune them out. But he comes to the mansion. He kind of like forces his way in, and the butler is like very hesitant, and he's kind of sneaking around. I love this last scene. There's so much like tension.
Yep.
But it's not overdone. It's just the right amount. And he goes up into the room. He realizes that she's very sick. She's basically dying in his arms in her bedroom. She tells him that the uranium ore is from the Aimores Mountains, which I guess she picked up, from one of the Nazis. Basically, what he does is he drags her out of the house, right with Sebastian there, and because Sebastian's Nazi friends are there, he knows that if Sebastian makes a scene about it, the Nazi friends are going to like wise up that something's going on, and they're going to do to him what they did to the other Nazi dude. So he's basically like forced into letting Devlin take her out.
And Sebastian never told his Nazi friends that something's wrong with uranium. He kind of kept that, to himself because he doesn't want to admit that, oh yeah, I did accidentally marry a secret agent.
Yeah. And that was the mother. The mother was very like clear about that they couldn't find out. There's this great scene where he's just the two men, like Sebastian and Devlin, these two rivals are just kind of staring at each other, and like Devlin knows that he's got Sebastian. Sebastian's knows what Devlin's doing and that he can't do anything about it. And basically Devlin brings Alicia out of the house into the car. Basically, if he lets Sebastian come with them to go to the hospital, the whole story will kind of check out. Mm-hmm. But instead, he basically just leaves him there and takes her. And so now the Nazis are like, who is this dude that just took your wife? They call him in to like have a quote unquote talk with him.
Poor little Sebastian. So
bye little Sebastian.
So end of movie. one of these kind of movies from this time period that just go like, and over. And nothing, really sudden end. We don't really learn what happens to Alicia, but we kind of probably assume that she's going to be okay. We don't really know what happens to the uranium ore, but it'll probably get seized by the U.S. government or the Brazilian government. And we're not really sure what happens to the Nazi group, but I'm sure they're, probably going to get shut down. And probably, yeah, you're right, Sebastian's not going to have a good time anymore. So that's the movie. I thought, again, it's like an hour and a half or so. Pretty brisk. Does have some nuclear stuff in it, so I'd love to get into that before we kind of do our parking lot movie discussion here. And there's really only one big thing, right? It's even though this is a spy movie and a love story, the uranium ore was really a key element of this plot. And again, the first time it was used, in a Hollywood movie to a big degree. Here's the story behind this. There's a lot of, as there is with Hitchcock. One, I'll just say this to start off here, there's a lot of rumors about Hitchcock, about him being quite an awful individual when it comes to his personal life. He was awful to a lot of his female stars, whatever he can do to get the shot. So I'm not going to praise the man at all, but I'm going to tell an interesting story about him, as from someone who, is this icon in Hollywood. So there's a lot of myth there, and there's also some truth that may be still interesting, but not as kind of the big. I'll tell you the myth. The myth is that Hitchcock wanted this thing in his story because he wanted to have something in the movie to have the romantic pairing of Grant and Bergman have a box office bang comparable to an atomic blast, is what Kiz kind of was saying. So this movie came out on August 15th, 1946. So the United States bombed Hiroshima with an atomic bomb literally almost 1 year prior in 1945, but the movie was really far, into production. The production process, I don't think it had started filming, but it was close kind of when that did happen. Here's what his story is. He said that, in the early 1940s, uranium was known, but we didn't really know everything that it could do. The Manhattan Project was very much not in people's mind and not in the press. He wanted this as a plot device. He says that he knew about the Manhattan Project because he had a writer friend who worked for the New Yorker magazine. And he and others that he had talked to said that there was this secret Manhattan Project activity that was being taken place, and he just knew that this was going to be a big deal. He had trouble convincing his screenwriter that was actually writing the movie for him because he didn't understand what the logic of this plot device was and why anyone would care about it. Why would the U.S. government care about any of this? He convinced his screenwriter to go talk to a physicist at Caltech named Robert Milken, and to learn more details about what uranium was, what it looked like, what it could be for. And even that guy said, hey, back off. The government's not too happy about people talking about uranium anymore. There was a lot of shutdown in the press about, uranium sciences and nuclear physics. So people weren't supposed to be talking about this at the moment. But he's like, I'm going to go ahead and do this. And then Hitchcock claimed that he knew that this was going to be something that was going to be for the military purpose. And he later claimed that he was followed for 3 months by the FBI after the film's release. And here's what he said about this. He says that, his producer asked, "What in the name of goodness is that?" And Hitchcock said, "This is uranium. It's the thing they're going to make an atomic bomb with." And then the producer asked, "Well, what is the atomic bomb?" And then Hitchcock says, "Well, you must remember, in 1944, a year before Hiroshima, I only had one clue. A writer friend of mine that told me that scientists were working on a secret project somewhere in New Mexico. It was so secret that once they went into the plant, they never emerged again. I was also aware that the Germans were conducting experiments with heavy water in Norway. So these clues brought me to the uranium MacGuffin. The producer was skeptical, and he felt that it was absurd to use the idea of atomic bombs as the basis for our story. I told him that it wasn't the basis for the story, only the MacGuffin, and I explained there was no need to attach too much importance to it." So, very interesting. According to this story, it makes it look like an atomic prophet who knew that uranium was going to be so important for anyone else to the public. Before I get into the truth of that story, what do you make of all of that?
It's interesting because sometimes the things that are right in front of us at the time and seem obvious later on that they're going to become big, don't necessarily register until well after the fact. And some people are good about kind of seeing it. You see this everywhere in terms of technology and the internet, and just people have ideas and you're like, oh, that was quite obvious. And it makes me wonder if this is one of them, that this sensational aspect of all this stuff relating to the atomic bomb and just how it's just like almost it's uncomprehendable for most people, like the power and the Manhattan Project and the physics behind it and the power behind the bomb and all that. So he must, I mean, it's kind of cool that he seems to have called it a little bit.
So I have a copy of something I bought on eBay from the Saturday Evening Post. Remember that gigantic magazine?
Yeah.
So this is a gigantic magazine. The cover is funny. It's like a little girl in a hat eating an apple and the cover. But if you go open up into one of the pages in the middle, there's a story called "The Atom Gives Up Its Secrets." And it's written by someone named William Lawrence, who this issue came out in September 1940. So, 5 years before the atomic bomb project was completed. But in that story, Lawrence came up with, really interesting reporting, because at the time it was public information that there was this breaking science field of atomic physics, and they knew that you can do uranium. You can use uranium to do fission, and if you do fission, it releases energy that was holding the atom together. And they were just trying to figure out, well, if there was a way to do that in a sustained way, you can produce heat, which is producing power, or you could do it in a really quick way and you produce a bomb. And people in science fiction had talked about this. H.G. Wells had a story several, almost a decade or so before this, about, atomic bombs and things. So it wasn't like the nuclear age appeared out of nowhere, and the Manhattan Project was the first anyone ever talked about this. So it was out there, but really he was the first to ever jump on this as a nuclear plot device and everything. And here's a little bit more information. We learn from a couple different sources that Hitchcock, he exaggerated quite a bit. According to a very famous biography of him called The Dark Side of Genius, it says that by the time Notorious actually began filming in October of 1945, Hitchcock made one major final trip to London because he wanted to, take his script and meet with some people that he was doing screen testing for in New York. But he went to London, and several of these people were famous German refugees that he casted ultimately in the movie. And he wanted to have, some conversations with them and find out, what was going on. And again, this is after the atomic bombings of Japan. Apparently, based on these conversations he was having with German contacts and the accounts that started to flood the press, Hitchcock ultimately added, pretty late in the script, the atomic MacGuffin. It wasn't like early script versions. It was kind of added near the end. And all evidence suggests that the uranium was added after the fact, after the atomic bombs dropped. It wasn't like he had written it into it and then it happened. And apparently he told the producer, look, if you don't like uranium, let's just make it like industrial diamonds, which the Germans need, cut their tools with or something. He later claimed that he told a movie executive who objected to the screenplay on the grounds of implausibility. He said, "You were wrong to attach any importance to the MacGuffin. Notorious was simply the story of a man in love with a girl who, in the course of her official duties, had to go to bed with another man and even to marry him. That's the story." So I guess he's kind of talking to me a little bit here, that I shouldn't care all that much about the uranium plot or any of this, but it is a fascinating thing that it's gotten used as a MacGuffin. And nowadays, you and I watched a couple of these Mission Impossible movies where the nuke stuff is so irrelevant to the plot. It's just the thing to drive Tom Cruise to jump off or climb a building or whatever. But in this movie, they really kind of kick-started here.
Well, I guess, like, my question to you is, how did you view the whole use of the uranium? I mean, if you had to go, imagine, like, Tim Westmyer, you were born at this time, like, Tim's going to the movies in 1946. He's interested in this Manhattan Project. I mean, would you see that, and would that, like, add something to this for you in a way that maybe the Diamond MacGuffin might not?
The idea of, well, this is a national security risk, and that's why we're committing resources and trying to, like, almost, maybe the government, maybe the G-men didn't really care all that much about, Alicia and her well-being, but they were willing to sacrifice her into this situation because of the fact that there was some sort of national security risk, some sort of German rearmament, and the idea of, like, well, diamonds would allow them use them as tools to cut better. Well, I mean, the war is over. Like, what do you mean? But if maybe this is something that allows them a small group to get an atomic bomb, and now they build a bunch of them, and is that a mission, that can cause something to happen that would disrupt the status quo a year after the war had ended? At least that is something that I think raises the stakes a bit for their mission, which I enjoyed. It's a lot there to have to, like, stretch to understand where the risk would really be. If whatever this Dr. Anderson is doing, they never say. They keep that very vague. Is he enriching uranium?
Right.
I think at one point they mentioned that one of them that was working for them was like a metallurgist. So maybe they were able to take the refined uranium and smelt it and get it into a core of a uranium bomb. So maybe that's part of what they were planning on doing. It's just not really, they're not really clear about any of it. But if it is just uranium ore that's not enriched, okay. There's a lot of things you have to do with that. First, right, you have to do quite a bit of things to shape the uranium core, to build the gun type bomb design, or uranium, version of an implosion bomb. You have to test the bomb to make sure it works. Because even though the United States never tested, their atomic bomb that was uranium based, they knew that it was going to work. But I don't know why these scientists would necessarily know that all of it was going to work. And even if they had enriched the uranium, because they say, well, it was mined from this place, these mountains, maybe they just didn't understand, the screenwriters, or they thought that film goers didn't understand that you can't just take like a chunk of rock from a mountain and put it into a bomb and it will explode. You have to do things to get to that refined level in order to be able to actually use it as a weapon. But if they did know that, it's a lot harder to hide an enrichment facility inside of your basement. These take a lot of space. They take a lot of power. They take a lot of time at that particular period. Manhattan Project is, people always say in the United States that we're going to need a Manhattan Project to do this, a Manhattan Project to do that.
Right.
There's a reason for that. It's because the Manhattan Project was like a national level, manufacturing effort that took hundreds of thousands of people and millions of dollars in the national focus to get this thing done. You can't do this with any number of Nazis hiding out in Brazil.
We need a Manhattan Project to free Britney Spears, I think.
Yeah, that's the next one.
Yeah, that'll be our next one.
It's either a moonshot or a Manhattan Project.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, it's those two.
It is funny, though. He mentions Hitchcock in this kind of original story I told about a heavy water plant in Norway that the Germans were using. We talked about that on the most recent episode of our podcast, where we talked about the heavy water war and the sabotage effort that the Norwegian resistance fighters did against the Germans who were using this heavy water plant, which you can use to enrich uranium. But there's no discussion of any of this, in the movie. But it works. It's unclear. I will say this: getting access to fissile material is really the hardest part of building an atomic bomb these days. It's fortunately very difficult to do, but it was one that Germany was having trouble overcoming. But access to uranium was not the hardest part of the bomb project. It was getting it enriched and knowing what they needed to do to actually make it into a bomb. But anyways, it's an interesting plot device. I think it's worth it, and I'm glad they didn't do something otherwise, which is now us starting to get into our parking lot movie discussion that's non-nuclear focused. It's when you and I used to go to movies, either when we were kids or these days, we would go see a film and talk about it in the parking lot when it was over.
Although you just went to your first in-person movie recently.
I saw Black Widow. It was pretty fun with a former podcast guest and friend of ours, Kevin.
I was invited, but I broke my arm the day before and wasn't really feeling like going to a movie. So
yeah, and I didn't want to. I'm glad you didn't elbow your way in. What do you think? Do you think that if this was Diamonds, do you think you would enjoy the movie as much?
I think it's effective. It brings it to another level. What I'm a little surprised by, to hear Hitchcock saying, "Oh, it could have been Diamonds, it could have been anything." There was clearly something there, because he takes great care to show the ore, and the fact that it's being hidden in wine bottle. I mean, if the story was really just about their relationship, they didn't need to show this ore at all. They could have open up a room and there'd be plans there and they'd know.
Yeah.
There was something about showing that. And so it's weird that they didn't show any more of what was going on. I would have expected to see an actual bomb. I think that would have been cool if we saw a bomb being built. Because if there's any critique there on the use of it, it's that. I like your theory about, it raising the stakes and making it seem more plausible that essentially this woman is being prostituted to be a spy by the U.S. government, no less. I mean, that's some kind of crazy stuff for the time when you think about it. And maybe this is what allowed people to kind of get over that cognitive dissonance. But, maybe if you had the Diamonds, you get a different conclusion that maybe people are pretty cold and heartless and are willing to essentially use this woman as bait over nothing, over something less valuable. So I think it definitely plays an important part in this movie. They didn't like lean into it the way that I thought they would. That's kind of my thought. What do you think about it?
So let me tell her an interesting story really quickly. Even before you were the co-host of this podcast, you've been on this before when we talked about the, I think it was The City on the Edge of Forever. Why don't you do a quick 30-second description of the plot? Because it is somewhat relevant because it's a world where the Germans were able to actually build an atomic bomb. So do that, do a 20-second version of that before I tell my story. So you can talk about the Star Trek bit of this.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, Star Trek episode. The Nazis. It's a world in which then there's a woman who is a nuclear activist and she gets murdered. By her not getting murdered, there's this alternate timeline where she doesn't get murdered, and as a result, the Germans are able to make the bomb and dominate the world. Kirk and Spock go back in time and have to basically see what's going on and fix the timeline. And to do that, there's a scene where Kirk basically has to allow this woman to get murdered, and it's very painful and traumatic. Very interesting. Yeah, I mean, another story of a dashing, hero character kind of letting a woman, go to harm in order for some sort of greater good. Well, in real life, there was a situation where the United States and its allies thought that the Germans were very close to building an atomic bomb. And that was one of the main big impetuses for the Manhattan Project. Moving forward, a lot of the scientists involved were saying that, I wouldn't have done this unless the fact that the Germans were getting close to building an atomic bomb of their own. Well, it turns out that when we, the United States and the Allies, won World War II, and they started to take some of the German scientists, to the States or to Britain and interviewed them about where they were with their project, and we learned more about kind of where that project was overall. It wasn't very far along at all. They were really stuck on figuring out, one, how they were going to do the enrichment, how the science of everything worked. They had a Nobel Prize winner in the version of Heisenberg, but they couldn't figure out what to do next. And one of the small experiments that they did was they went secretly into a beer and wine cellar down in Berlin. A scientist, started this little reactor that they were trying to build. It was a converted potato and beer cellar in this particular a church. That's funny.
They were down here and they called it the atomic cellar, and it was a reactor, and it wasn't the kind of reactor that the United States or the British used to make fissile material, but it was kind of imagine at Christmas time and you have a string of popcorn, where you take your popcorn, you pop it and you put it on a string, dangling strings like that. So beads of uranium cubes. And if they're aligned, closely together, you actually can generate heat and kind of have a bit of a reactive system. Well, the Germans were playing around with this, and it's really interesting science, but it's not the next thing you need to do to build uranium a based weapon. But it's they're still trying to figure out, well, what levels of uranium fission needs to take place, and they were at this very basic level. Well, again, they found this in a beer cellar down at the bottom of a church. So maybe, I don't know if they knew this story, but we make fun of the fact that they were hiding this uranium in a wine cellar. But hey, there's some truth to this. There was some German Nazi uranium experiments being done in a cellar where alcohol was kept. I will say this. I wonder why it was kept in a wine bottle. I know why, because it's really cool. But you keep it in a wine bottle. Why don't you just keep it in a box somewhere and they'll never find it? If he just if he didn't put it in his wine collection, but he put it in a closet box, in a shoebox, they never would have found it.
Yeah, I mean, it fits the whole theme with all the drinking and clearly alcohol runs through the movie, but it's I agree with you. It was a little bit silly,
but it as a movie, it worked, I think, tremendously. I really, really enjoyed it. I even enjoyed the Nazis in Brazil kind of subplot. This is definitely a thing, but I always just thought it was a joke because, I know you like to watch the TV show Archer too, but, Dr. Krieger's character was definitely, I think he was supposed to be a clone of Hitler, but born and raised in Brazil. I always thought it was funny, but I never knew it was this level of intensity. I did enjoy it. The one question I have left for you is, do you think this movie could be remade today? And if it was, what do you think would replace the uranium in a bottle?
I mean, it could be remade. Like, to me, the story is all about, there's like this brinksmanship going on about how far are they willing to go. Like, how far is Devlin willing to go to, like, you know, serve his country and you know, basically put the woman he loves into the arms of another man. How far is she willing to go to, like, prove that she can do this task, even though doing it is, like, you know, requires her to go to some great lengths. So I think there's still stuff that can be said about this that maybe the movie doesn't necessarily say, or that we could, you know, find more to say today. So yeah, I think it could. Probably not a good idea to touch a Hitchcock movie, though. Maybe you could do it in some other form, spin-off, maybe a sequel, their grandkids or something. I don't know. It's probably a bad idea. What would the MacGuffin be? I don't know, like AI, maybe an AI that they're working on that's gonna, like, become sentient and is gonna, like, trigger this whole thing. And the whole thing, like, they've gone so big in terms of, like, plots and plans to destroy the world, but yeah, maybe there'd be something about an AI that was hidden in a USB that's in some, like, whiskey bottles or something like that. That could be the new version of that. Please don't remake this movie, Hollywood. Like, it's good as it is. Mm-hmm. Even with all the cringe stuff, it's still good.
All right, so let's wrap up here. Let's do our rating system. This is where we rate whatever we are talking about here on a scale of 1 to 5, with 5 being, you know, amazing, terrific, 1 being the worst. Let's do that. We always do, you know, use 1 to 5, but I always like to tailor the rating system because, you know, look, if we're going to get super critical about the content, I might as well raise my game when it comes to the system itself, the metrics. So I've crunched the numbers here. I've talked with Prescott, and he says that we should use a scale of 1 out of 5 bottles of uranium ore on the wall. Because if you have just 1 bottle of uranium ore on the wall and you take one down and pass it around and it happens to fall, you're out of luck. But if you got 5, you know, you can take one down, pass it around, and it will be an enriching experience for all involved.
Now I know what we're going to be singing on our next road trip, Tim. That's great.
I love it. Well, let me go real quick here. I think I'll give this 4 bottles of uranium ore on the wall. I think when I first watched it, I gave it a 3.5. I think it's a 4. Completely acknowledging all of the really difficult these days, you know, gender dynamics and some of the other kind of plot points and stuff. The movie itself is really interesting and gripping from kind of beginning to end, even without the nuclear stuff, which I think, in a weird way, it kind of does add some very positive stuff to the film. I think the performances are really good. There's some scenes that are very gripping. I would love to see this movie in the theater because I think these kind of movies really, it's easy to drift your eyes kind of away from a screen of this kind of like somewhat slower black and white movies. I think I'd love to sit down and just watch this like on the big screen. I can get the kind of more experience that it was like to see this as people saw it for the first time. So maybe one of these days we can do that. But I would say I actually give it a 4. I really did enjoy it. I recommend it to people. It's for free online. There's no reason why someone shouldn't see this. Gabe?
Can I do a half bottle, like a bottle that's like, because it's been smashed in half because somebody's been drinking too much uranium wine and
maybe it's one of those small bottles you get at like a hotel refrigerator.
Just a little bit of uranium wine, not a lot of uranium ore wine. Yeah, I do 4.5. I totally agree with you. There's a lot of stuff in here that is not cool like today. But I think if you look at kind of the technical, just like the film, I'm not a filmmaking expert by any means. I read a little bit about kind of the shots and everything, but it was clear while I was watching it as a layperson that I was seeing something special, different, like ahead of its time, from some of the camera angles and some of just the way people's faces were brought in. There were things that I noticed that as a layperson that I was kind of surprised and I thought that was great. That last scene with just like the tension like builds up into this last scene, just really well done. And yeah, there's a little bit of silliness, but and again, you know, some cringe stuff, but it's just it's a good movie. I think it's worth watching.
People can go watch this, and if they're done with that and they want to watch more, or they want to read more about the content in Notorious, I have a few recommendations here. Maybe you've got a couple of things, but I will recommend one. And this is really to you as well, because you haven't seen any other Hitchcock movies. I recommend a movie that's now on Amazon Prime. I'm going to watch it probably this weekend, called Rear Window. It's one of my favorite movies. There's recently I guess I'm too old now to say recently, but it was remade not too long ago. But it stars Jimmy Stewart and Grace Kelly. And it's a story about a guy who's like a journalist, and he breaks his leg. So maybe it's really relevant to you. He breaks his leg, he breaks a bone, and is kind of stuck at home, and he uses like a window, and he looks out his window with a telescope and sees like crime that he thinks is being committed, like a murder, and he doesn't know what to do with this information. He can't do anything about it because he's stuck in a bed with his broken foot and broken leg. But it's a really fascinating kind of look in the world about kind of what's happening, and it's very suspenseful. So I recommend that one quite a bit. I recommend another movie from 1978 called The Boys from Brazil, which stars Gregory Peck from On the Beach, as well as Laurence Olivier and a young Steve Guttenberg, who people may know from Police Academy, but also The Day After, another famous nuke movie. And it's about uncovering a group of ex-Nazis hanging out in Brazil. Good movie. And finally, this isn't really a book or anything or a movie, but invest in some uranium glass. They're really, really cool stuff. It's stuff that I'll post a bunch of links about, and I've given Gabe, I think, a glass of uranium glass. Anyone that's a guest on the podcast, I bought a bunch at an auction in Alexandria, Virginia, last 2 years ago, and it's like cocktail glasses. I have all kinds. I have butter dishes. I gave my mom a butter dish when she visited recently, but it's glass that was made in the 50s, 60s, 70s using uranium filings. Again, it's metal ore, and they grind it down and they put it into the sand that they use to make the glass. And they also add a little bit of green tint to it so that it's green. And if you use a UV light, it'll light up. If you have a Geiger counter, it'll be slightly more radioactive in the background. They don't make it anymore because people don't think it's cool anymore, or maybe they don't think it's safe anymore. But it's really interesting. I think it's fascinating because I have had wine out of a uranium glass, and it's been fun.
Did it taste so much better than regular wine?
It tasted dusty because I hadn't washed the glass well enough.
Oh, no.
But one of these days, when I get a chance to kind of get together with Gabe again in person, we hang out every once in a while, but we don't drink wine anymore. We'll get together and maybe you can have some wine, maybe a port out of some uranium glass. We'll get together and do that. But check this stuff out. It's really fascinating stuff. And you can find it. It's not so rare that it's super expensive. There are versions of it around.
Here's a question: would you feel comfortable having your 1.5-ish-year-old child drink out of uranium glass?
I would, because uranium glass is not more radioactive than concrete. It's more radioactive than background, but it's not. I would. The thing that's dangerous about uranium glass is if it breaks and it turns to a fine powder, and you get that in your lungs because it's toxic.
So he needs like a uranium sippy cup.
Exactly. Oh, while you tell your recommendations, I'm gonna look on eBay.
So my I think I mentioned this before. Another great movie with Ingrid Bergman, Casablanca. Nothing to do with nukes or anything, but just throw out another old movie that I like. I'd also recommend an article that I saw when we were researching the episode on NPR about how there are people who apparently look at radioactive decay in wine bottles to date the wine bottles and make sure that they're of the proper age and everything like that, and catch fraud. So Tim, you can throw a link up in the show notes, but I thought that was a pretty cool read, kind of tangential to our thing here.
We talked about that on our atomic alcohol episode of our podcast.
Nice. Well, it's coming. It's being revived. It's Lazarus coming back for this one.
Well, it was. We did have a lot of atomic alcohol in that episode, so I don't fault you for forgetting that. Gabe, thanks so much for coming back on the podcast. I know you're on a lot of painkillers because of your broken elbow, but we appreciate you having you back on the show. Hope you're feeling better. And drink lots of milk, get those bones back together, because I need you back on the show.
This show is the one thing that is giving me hope to recover. I need my podcasting arm back.
You got to hold the microphone somehow.
Yeah, exactly.
Thanks for listening to another episode of the Supercritical Podcast. If you have any suggestions for future episodes, or you want to tell us what we got wrong, either nuke-wise or hey, maybe you actually have a wine cellar and you keep some weird stuff in wine bottles down there. I'm not going to judge, but you can tell me why I'm wrong. A couple ways you can do that. We're on Twitter at Nuclear Podcast. We're on our website, supercriticalpodcast.com, where I have lots of show notes, all the research that goes into each episode. I've got some other kind of fun stuff up on there. And you can email me, supercriticalpodcast@gmail.com. People have been sending me a number of lovely messages and questions. Once I'm done, I promise, moving. I sold my house, bought another one, raising a toddler who just turned 18 months. When I'm all done with all of this stuff and done moving, I'm going to be much more responsive, and we're going to get a lot more episodes out. So thanks everybody who still's listening. Until next time, this has been Tim Westmyer.
And Gabe.
And remember, if it's pop culture and radioactive, we're bound to get super critical about it. Have a good one.